Hello and a very warm welcome to this week's Geraldine Jamieson interview. Now, I feel honoured to introduce my guest today. Squadron Leader John Peters, former pilot of the British Royal Air Force, and on the first day of the Gulf War, aged just 29, and on his very first mission during Operation Desert Storm, John was shot down over Iraqi territory and captured by the military of Iraq. After 4 days of mental and physical torture, he was forcibly shown on Iraqi television, his disfigured image becoming a potent symbol of Saddam Hussein's ruthless aggression. Well, a 7-week ordeal of torture and interrogation followed, testing John Peters to the absolute limit and bringing him close to death. John, a very warm welcome indeed to the programme.
Thank you very much.
Now, I'm sure that we all remember those ghastly TV images of your badly bruised and broken body, your face slumped to one side. It certainly sent shivers down me, recalling those vivid TV pictures all these years later. Take us back to the shock of the capture and then relentless torture, day and night to follow. How did you cope?
Well, you don't really have any choice. It happens, really. It's like a lot of people believe there's a decision in there. Really, there's not. I mean, you've been flying over the desert. The aircraft was hit by a surface-to-air missile, then anti-aircraft guns. It became a ball of fire. You then eject into the desert. Then you're taken off to Baghdad. You arrive at Baghdad. They took about 10 hours to get us there. Arrived at Baghdad, pushed us in a room, and within 2 seconds of the room, a bomb hit the building, and the building collapsed on top of us, and you're picked up 5 feet and thrown 10 feet and under a pile of rubble. Then you've got the 4 or 5 days there of interrogation, so that's no sleep for 4 or 5 days. You're beaten with baseball bats, rubber truncheons, they set your hair on fire, burn you with cigarettes, you have mock executions. And it's, how do you cope? You just hang on to the fact that you can't really use your brain. You see, there's 2 parts really to the captivity. You have the part after the first week, which was the most intensive beating, is where the second half is very much sporadic beatings, and I've been blown up 5 times, but you just ride with the blows really and just hope that you can contain your fear.
Were they trying to get information out of you?
Yes.
Did they ask the same question, again and again and again?
Well, there's in interrogation, there's all sorts of techniques. I mean, it's just like the Starsky and Hutch, you get the hard cop, soft cop. In training, the hard cop just shouts to you. In reality, you're talking to someone with, say, a wonderful lilting voice like you, who you want to talk to, and then suddenly, you can't see it because you've got a bag in your head and you're handcuffed, and suddenly you hear like a door slam open, and before you know it, you're being hit with baseball bats. And then you get the wonderful lilting voice going, it sort of, as if you're scuffling and holding him back. You go, oh, don't worry, look, I can hold him back. He's just killed his brother. But if you talk to me, and you desperately want to talk to that bloke because he's going to stop the nasty bloke hitting you, then you get things like the same questions for 24 hours. The same question, what aircraft did you fly? And you don't answer, they hit you about. And that whole thing is that repetition. It normalises the question that after a while you go, what's the important? But the importance is they want you to talk. So,
what were your darkest moments during your captivity?
Darkest moments was being paraded on television. It's so weird being that image that people talk about, because they say all these wonderful words since I got back. That moment, one, I thought I was going to die afterwards. I thought they were going to shoot me. But I thought, right, this is the moment I'm going to die. And the enduring image is everyone's going to think I'm a traitor. Everyone thought that I was weak, and that my kids that I'd never know, who are 2 years old and 6 weeks old, their enduring image of their father would be a weak, failed man who was a traitor. And that would be the enduring image of my children.
How well prepared were you for that period of captivity?
As well as one can be prepared. I mean, a certain type of character joins the military. You've gone through the tenacious training. I had been exposed to what one could expect in interrogation, so I knew that. And you'd prepared your mind. I mean, that's what you paid paid me to do. So we can get terribly sentimental about someone like me, but you say, you don't want to go to war, you pay someone like me to go to war. And if you join the military without accepting that contract, you're a fool. So you go, I was paid to endure, and that doesn't mean that I want to die. It means that, I didn't expect to end up in that circumstance. But if I'd given in, it was only 7 weeks. I think you should be banging on the door of the Ministry of Defence saying, what are we spending all the money on? Because we expect, without sounding too pompous, I was an officer in your military. That's what you expect me to do.
Was there any other captive anywhere near you?
Yeah, well, we were all held in solitary confinement, but we were all held in the same building. Yes, there were other prisoners who, on the moments that we were bombed, you could sort of, under the doors, talk along the corridor. But that was rare. About 4 or 5 times you actually had contact with others.
Does religion play a part in your life? And if so, was it something you turned to during this captivity?
That's a relatively involved question. I suppose before I went to war I was agnostic. And in captivity I found myself praying to God. But I found myself suddenly looking down at my hands clasped together thinking, what am I doing? Am I doing this because it's sort of Pavlov's dog? We've been told, I went to Sunday school and we've been told this entity called God exists. Or is it because I'm that frightened that I've almost constructed a superego, so I can't quite cope, so in my mind's eye there's a superego I'll call God, and I can transport my fear onto this all-encompassing thing, entity. Or am I praying to a deity? When you go through that process, I found myself, yes, I did, the only one that gives you solace is the final one, so I did believe in God and I prayed in God. But when I left captivity, that left me and I felt hypocritical. So I tried to see the padre, who's the priest on base. He gave me a book which I didn't read. I tried to go to church. I don't like organised religion. And so I then started saying I was agnostic, and for a number of years. And it was only, but that still didn't fit right. So after about 7 years after the Gulf, what I would say now, do I believe in a God? Yes, I do. Do I go to church? No, I don't. I had a very real sense of God, and I do believe in God. I think my philosophy, albeit that is counter to a military view, I suppose, is I like the Buddhist philosophy, but I believe in a Christian God.
Well, there's no harm in having two sides to one. If you get on with one side for a while,
Yeah,
then you can always turn to the other.
Yeah, look, I'm as confused as everyone. I'm nearly 50. I don't know the answer. It's I think like any of us, all of us go through experiences of marriage, death, love, whatever challenges we have, and some of those challenges make us question our fundamental beliefs, our spirituality, and I don't think that ever ends. We all through those challenges try and explore some sense of meaning bigger than self, and I hope all people do that. Isn't that a sign of maturity, that ultimately it becomes less and less about self and more about something bigger than self? And so I think it's an ongoing exploration. I don't know the answer, but I have a sense of God.
How did you get out? How were you rescued from the situation?
Basically, I did nothing. I sat in my cell, and every day we were getting bombed, and the ground is always vibrating, and sometimes it hit us, sometimes it didn't. And then suddenly the bombing stopped, and it went dead quiet. And in captivity and solitary confinement, that's everything, sound. Then the following morning, and it was eerily quiet and eerily still, and you did think, what's happened? And I thought, the war must be over, there must be something going. And then suddenly the following morning, there was a knock on the door. Now normally this door just slammed open, they came and beat the hell out of you. But there was a knock on the door, and the door kind of opened, and a guy stood in a grey suit, and he stood there and said, put his jacket button, tied it up, centre button, just did it up to make, I suppose, form. He said, "Good morning, Flight Lieutenant Peters. I'd just like to tell you the war's over. If there's anything my staff can do for you, please ask." And that was weird. Are you cold? Yes. So they gave us blankets because we didn't have any. Would you like some food? If you'd like to go to the toilet, just knock on the door and my staff will take you. I mean, it was just surreal. And then the whole release process was just unbelievably surreal. But that's actually how we got released.
Well, what thoughts go through your mind as you look at the current situation in North Africa and the Gulf?
A sadness, I suppose. Someone like me is trained, and an awful lot of money is trained, and I think most people join the military with a sense of, I hope, honour, that you would only apply those skills to create something better when ultimately the conversation breaks down and that human beings can't sort it, and that we use the minimum amount of force we can to then re-establish conversations that people can solve their issues. I suppose for someone like me who's been in war, you realise how little has been solved, and arguably we also complicate it as well. So I think it's sadness, but equally, I suppose people would concentrate on Libya and Afghanistan and places like that, but I found things like the Egyptian circumstance hugely hopeful in that region, with so many criticisms one can have of whatever each of those nations' issues are, that actually the Egyptians saying, look, we can solve this. One, we can solve this by ourselves, and two, we don't have to resort to violence, and we will choose our own destiny in a peaceful way. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I think there's huge hope at this moment in time.
Well, can a conflict in Libya, such as we're talking about, be resolved without troops on the ground?
I think in reality, I would suggest probably not, because now which troops is the political question as to, and what involvement. I think it would be extremely difficult for the West to actually, or NATO or United Nations, to put troops directly on the ground. But how long does it take to cobble together the forces necessary for the other Libyans, rebels, to be able to do it themselves? I mean, that is why you've got people cleverer than me, I hope, in governmental positions who've got to come to that very balanced views. I mean, for me personally, I think the interesting thing is what about the other Arab nations? It's easy to criticise Western forces, but the Arab nations all have, they have a lot of our weaponry, they have a lot of the troops and the aeroplanes. If they perceive that Libya is an issue, why aren't they solving it? And they could put troops on the ground, but that becomes an even more dangerous question, because they have to look unto themselves.
Well, if we move away from troops exactly, have any manned fighter planes in 20 years' time, do you think that there will be any? Or will they all just become unmanned drones?
I think there's going to be a mix. Certainly in the foreseeable future, most of the systems that we'll see in 20 years' time are pretty much already well on the way to being developed. But yes, I do believe that arguably in the longer term, with the technology that we do have now, that it would seem ridiculous to have men in aeroplanes. Certainly for aspects like my job, where you've got to fly into a country and the political ramifications if that person got shot down and captured. In terms of air defence, that may be slightly different. The key in both those jobs, though, is however clever the computer is you've still got the instinctive decision-making of a man or woman in that cockpit, which that judgment is the thing that wins wars in one respect, and also means that when we put people in those circumstances, it is also a balance, because when you have to put your life on the line, it also means that you respect that war is not easily fought. And the moment you separate the human being from threat, suddenly it becomes a computer game, and you've got the moral issue of then it just becomes, we just take out targets rather than other human beings. And the moment you use that, you lose your humanity.
Do you still have buddies in the Royal Air Force that you...
Buddies, yes. Through my formative years, you create some brilliant friendships. I've got friends of 30 years who I admire unbelievably. Really clever, really smart people who make a difference. One's still in and doing extremely well. Most are out now, but leading big organisations and are just great people. I felt very privileged out of all the people I met in the Air Force. Really fantastic people, and that's really what a career is all about, isn't it?
Well, it has changed, of course. It must have since you signed up.
Yeah, because they're young and I'm old. You know, technology changes, people don't. It's when you talk to the old Spitfire pilots, you know, they may be 85, 90, 95 now, but you know, you can still see in their eyes. It's the same, yes, they're wizened old guys now, but if you talk to them, they have the same view, and that nature of character, who almost, I tell you one thing, the thing that will always distinguish aircrew is even if they're Chief of the Air Staff or boss of British Airways or whatever with pilots, look in their eyes, the moment you talk about flying, you'll get this childish little glint of, it's that little, God, if I can just, yes, and it's toys. It is this, however serious the job is, it's given that moment in time, you have this freedom to fly, and it is, you never lose that. It's a childhood dream.
Well, you are now one of the leading motivation speakers in the UK. Your corporate credits include Nortel, IBM, Sony, Lloyds, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and Peugeot Cars, to name but a few. You've written 2 best-selling books and the award-winning documentary Tornado Down. And, I like this, you followed Nelson Mandela on stage in South Africa, you achieving a standing ovation. That's truly something, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what's weird about, you know, what's happened. It suddenly, it was this threshold, you know, I was a normal junior executive in an organisation, happened to be military, and you don't expect any attention, and for a moment in my life, suddenly my life's transformed, and yes, quite unreal when suddenly you go out to South Africa. They didn't tell, by the way, before I went out there, out to South Africa, an audience of 1,500, oh, the speaker before you is Nelson Mandela. Right, so world icon, 27 years, changed the world, and this English bloke who did 7 weeks. Unbelievable, and a huge privilege.
Have all your experiences, John, good and bad, helped prepare you really for your current role?
Yes, I think like anybody in their life, experience is a marvellous thing. I'm avaricious for new experiences and new memories and new stories, so I don't dwell really on the Gulf, but there are lessons that I gained from the Gulf, which you do carry through. First of all, I'm not scared of death, which gives you huge confidence. Everyone always assumes that I should be damaged, you know, you know, you must be suffering post-traumatic stress, but I would turn around saying, right, so what's the worst you can do to me now? Are you going to torture me? Are you going to kill me? And that gives you huge confidence. It's only when all your choices are removed, you suddenly realise the joy of having choice in your life. And so many people, I think, believe that, you know, when they've got kids, house responsibilities, bad bosses, what have you, that they have no choice. And it's only when choice of whether you can live or die, even a cup of water is taken away from you, you suddenly realise, look, you have all the choices you have in the world. Make your choices. So that was a major lesson, and so it makes you take risk when you come back. Why? Because you ain't going to fail. It's not going to kill you.
So would you say that your period of captivity changed you? And if so, how exactly?
No, I don't think it did. If you ask the people closest to me, Helen, my wife, or my good friends, they would say I'm more confident because of the experience. Of course, it's like any experience, it adds to your portfolio, but I don't believe it's changed my character. I've always been pretty open. I'm not embarrassed about what's happened to me, and I don't view failure as a fait accompli. Failure is an impression we have of ourselves, but then we learn from those things, and that's actually what we pass on to our kids. So I very much view the failures that I believe I had in the Gulf are just things I have to accept and learn from. And that's one of the big things. You have to forgive yourself for those sorts of failures. That doesn't mean surrender. I let myself down so many times in captivity because you're trying to live up to this perfect image you've set yourself that you're meant to be. And you let yourself down, but each time you learn, and the way you learn is you forgive yourself and you say, welcome to the human race. We all fail at things. forgive yourself for not quite living up to what you hoped you to be, and take the best from each of those experiences. So I suppose I've always been an eternal optimist, even in captivity. I never saw myself dead.
What about your children? I think you've got one in their 20s and one about 19?
Yes, my daughter's coming up for 21, and she's very beautiful and very clever, and my son is very clever and very sharp, and he's coming up for 23. Yeah.
Do they talk about your experiences?
No, not really. Well, it's just part of the fabric of our life, really. Like any kids, they probably think, why the hell would anybody want to talk to Dad because he's boring? But my daughter sort of doesn't like the image. My son sort of...
Proud?
Yes. He takes the mickey out of it. You know, he says, why should anybody go there? But he likes I suppose he enjoys the notoriety of it.
Tell me about the award-winning documentary, Tornado Down.
Well, that was one of...
Particularly the title.
Well, that came off Reuters, tornado down, as in there's been a tornado shot down. It's all those things, the book, the show, and even the speaking. I never planned any of this. It just evolved. Suddenly, you go from Air Force pilot, nobody, like everyone is a nobody, no one has any attention, to suddenly, like mass media attention. I mean, they reckon 650 million people saw that image worldwide, and you get back and suddenly you cannot go into a pub without a standing ovation. You walk in the street and people are, when we first got back, you couldn't walk in the street, people crying when they met you. Journalists, seriously, hardened journalists, when we got back, I don't know what it is, shaking when they met you, just weird. And so from that, people desperately wanted to know the story, people desperately wanted to know this, and it sort of evolved, the book into the documentary, and had the t-shirt, eating the cake, you just get consumed very rapidly. And that's quite frightening at the time, because you're still trying to build a career in the military, but you have those responsibilities because the Air Force wants you to do it as well. It's like being in a whitewater river, trying to avoid the rocks, trying to get to the edge, but knowing you're never going to get there because the bank that you were on has completely changed, and now you're tumbling down a new river, not knowing where it's going to go.
Well, what amazes me is that you received no Medal of Bravery at all. Quite extraordinary.
No, it's not.
I know you personally were not looking for it.
But that's you don't. The way the British system is, you do not. Well, first of all, we failed in what we were meant to do, so you don't get a medal for failing. Secondly, you get medals for. I've got a campaign medal, as in I was out there, and everybody who was out there, everybody who contributed to the war has a medal. So I'm no different to them. For those who are involved in actual operations, when I say where you could get shot at, you have a bar on your medal, which means that you're actually a little class, which means you're actually out there. And then, if someone does something significant of valour, then they get the valour medal. The only parameter we hit was we were in the campaign. Yes, we got shot down, and we endured that part of the war, but that's no different to any of the troops enduring on the ground.
John Peters, former RAF pilot, POW, author and motivational business speaker, it has been a heartfelt experience to have you join me on this week's Geraldine Jamieson interview. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.